Welcome back to Made for More. I am your host, Holly J. Moore. I am a divorce lawyer on a mission to help people use the adversity in their life for growth and to show up as the best version of themselves. I am joined today and every day by my producer, Aaron Bender.
Speaking of adversity, overcoming adversity, we've got a guy in studio who has done a lot of that.
Amazing story. We're talking to Tony Hoffman today. Drug addict, went to prison, came out on the other side like a changed man, successful business owner, and I cannot wait to dive into his story and how he came so far and overcame so much. We are here today with Tony Hoffman, the most sought after mental health and addiction speaker, as well as treatment center owner. Tony, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I know we've been trying to lock this in for a little bit now.
Yes.
And we finally got the schedules to align, so thank you.
Yes, thank you. I know you came from afar, so I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
So let's just jump right in.
Yep.
You, at one point, were addicted to drugs, living behind a dumpster, went to prison, and came out on the other side, coached at the Olympics, successful business owner, the most sought after speaker, a TED Talk speaker. How did you bridge that gap?
That's a loaded question with a lot of stuff, right?
Yes.
And I understand that that's a lot to digest. And in the beginning of getting out of prison, that was even a lot to digest for my parole agent. He actually thought I was full of shit. And he told my mom that. When I told him what I was going to do, he said, "Who brought you here?" He was like in total disbelief that why is this guy telling me he's going to go to the Olympics, he wants to race BMX professionally, start a nonprofit organization, become a speaker. And I'm looking at a guy that's filled with tattoos who paroled on high control for armed robbery. And now all of a sudden he has these really zealous goals that the average person doesn't get to accomplish in a lifetime. And so he just said, "Who brought you here? Like, I need to know who's co-signing this because to me, this is completely out of the realm of possible." So I brought my mom in and he said, "Do you know what your son is saying, like about what he's going to do?" And she says, "Yeah, he's been talking about this since he was in prison and he's been working very hard on his life to make sure that he can accomplish these goals. And are you talking about the bicycle and going to the Olympics?" And he says, "Yeah." And he says he's going to be a public speaker and have a treatment or a nonprofit organization. And my mom says, "Yeah, that's right." And he said, "Ma'am, your son's full of shit." And he was like, "I brought you in here to tell you to your face that your son is going to go back to prison within 30 days. And I'm going to rearrest him.
Yeah.
And it's going to be you and your husband's fault for being stupid enough to believe this kid's story."
Okay, so that's really interesting that you say that because this morning I was looking up statistics because in thinking about your story and, from what I know of you from following you on Instagram, I'm like, this is a pretty amazing journey. But I was thinking, wow, that's what you have done with your prison time, I think was the intention of prison, right? Like for rehabilitation. But the statistic I found this morning said 82% of people who are incarcerated will go on to commit another offense within 10 years of their release.
Yep.
So what was different for you?
What I did with my time, and that's what we would expect an inmate to do with their time. The problem is that prisons aren't structured in a way that rehabilitation is actually the goal. They're more structured in the form of housing and creating systems that can help the order of the day for an inmate work. So you have inmates that go to work to bottle milk that the inmates are going to drink, to sew the garments and the clothing that we're going to wear, or weld the things that go around the prison. And so we've created structure inside the prison, not to rehabilitate, but to busy people's time and not focus on the internal process, changing behaviors, learning how to change your environment and learning how to set goals, be financially responsible, how to be what we would want a person to be in society. And so when you look at things like the recidivism rate, to me, it all makes sense. I've always told people, if you make me the CEO of a prison, we will have the lowest recidivism rate we've ever seen within 20 years. Because what I would want to do with prisons is completely destroy what a prison looks like and turn it into a business. Now that might scare some people because when we think about private businesses right now, they're making money, right? But when I say business, I don't mean a profitable business financially, but what I mean is a CEO, not a warden. And the CEO has a mission, vision, and value for the prison. And what we're trying to do is accomplish rehabilitated individuals. So the product we produce is a person who shows up with behaviors that have miscalibrated use of instinct, create harm, cause harm to themselves and others, and can't be a part of society. And we reform those behaviors and we put them into a position when they get out that they can be productive members of society. To do that, it has to be a completely restructured from the top to the bottom, where the guards understand why they're there and what they're doing, where the free staff understand why they're there and what they're doing, and inmates get pocketed into locations based on psychological evaluations, personality tests, so we can figure out what their skills are, what their level of accountability is in that time. And it's my belief that that's what's missing, right? So when you look at my story, you're like, well, why can't everybody do that?
Right.
Well, everybody doesn't have a lot of the foundational skills that I went in with.
Okay.
And so what I did have was a structured home environment growing up. Mom and dad have been married 47 years.
Okay, this is what I want to now kind of go back to your origin, because I was actually wondering about this because I hadn't really seen a lot. I mean, I know you just did that recent post with, of course, the amazing Zach Bryan song Bass Boat. Yep. But in your thing, it was like, I was raised by a woman who was easily impressed. You know, his song says I was raised by a woman who was hardly impressed. And that made me think, okay, what was your home life growing up? Like, I, thank God, knock on wood, have not personally really dealt with addiction, both with people close to me or myself. So tell me, like, now in your personal development and growth, do you know what led to your addiction?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Mom and dad, the home environment was a very good home environment.
Okay.
But what I've learned is everybody's good environment also has things that are not conducive to certain types of behaviors, certain types of psyches. And then every person is an individual that processes reality quite different. That's why my brother is totally different than me, right? What was happening in our home was not being processed by his psyche the same way it was me. Right. So my parents were workaholics. They got up at 5 o'clock in the morning. They came home at 10 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night. We rushed dinner. It was kind of a pretend dinner to be a family. My family showed us how to work hard, be disciplined, have equal opportunity for people. They were givers. They were charitable.
What did they do for a living?
They were in the trucking industry.
Okay.
And so my dad originally got into that industry because Grandpa said he couldn't marry my mom without $5,000 in the bank. Okay. Well, he was a sophomore in high school and he wanted to marry my mom, so he just dropped out of school. Wow. And went and got a job, saved $5,000 and said, guess what? I got to marry your daughter now because you said this was the stipulation.
Right.
And so my mom also got into trucking. And so she was on the sales side originally. My dad started with driving trucks. Their story is, I guess what you could say, the American dream. You know, they got married, lived in a trailer down here in Yorba Linda area, and then moved out of a trailer and into a home, and then got transferred to Fresno, California, where I was raised. Okay. And so we moved our way up into the upper middle class, but the trucking industry didn't have 4 managers that could take place if one manager was out. There was literally somebody that ran the early morning, and then there was somebody that came in like my dad at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and ran till the doors closed and then started over. And so there was nobody to fill in for him. And my mom being with him, she just stayed with him the whole time. And so I was going through mental health struggles early, a lot of anxiety problems, a lot of self-image problems. Even though I was very gifted at sports, I had a lot of self-image problems. And then I got real.
Do you know what that stemmed from?
Just not having the reinforcement of mom and dad there to empower me. So that's really important, right? I encourage a lot of families, especially ones that have, you know, the 6, 7, 8 to 12 years old, is those are very formidable years where we have to be speaking empowerment, love, care, nurture, and really build up that belief system, because a human being doesn't know how to talk to themselves. The environment teaches them how to talk to themselves, right? That's why I always say the most important conversation you'll ever have in your life is the one you have with yourself.
Yes.
But where does that come from? It comes from our environment's influence on who we are, what we're capable, and what we mean to the world. And so with mom and dad being gone, that conversation was really directed by myself. Well, what was the direction of my self-conversation? It was my feelings. And my mental health struggles started early when I was a young teen. And so I just constantly felt discomforted. I constantly felt anxious. I struggled in a classroom. I was great at sports, but I didn't like the special attention that came with being good at sports. So there was just constant, looking at myself saying, I hate the way that I feel. That must mean that I'm not enough, or that I'm never going to be capable of doing things. And then it was like, why doesn't anybody else feel this way? I didn't identify with anybody else because, back in the 90s, we didn't have conversations like this.
Right.
If we would have
That's
had
very
this
true.
conversation, my family would have cowered and said, I can't believe you're talking about this.
Right.
You're making our family look so bad.
Yeah.
The churches, it was, I'm blessed, we're good, God is
Right,
great. Even
yes.
though you're watching mom get beat up by dad, or dad's an alcoholic and leaving, and you have to pretend and put on this mask, right? Well, it was even so in schools. There were no mental health resources.
Right.
Counselors were not therapists.
Right.
We didn't have therapists. So there was no place or community for me to identify with, hey, I go through that too. What does that mean? And then having the instruction of a trusted adult that could help me develop that conversation about what it means. You know what anxiety is.
Yeah.
You know what depression is. You know what suicidal ideation is, whether it's from you or your clients. Like, we all have these similarities as human beings, right?
Yeah.
But what we do with those is the determining, is the determining factor of kind of the behaviors we get involved in and then the outcomes we have. And so for me, struggling with my mental health, that was actually the precursor of why substances would come into play that would eventually lead me to prison. And then eventually I would reset there and say, you know what? I have some very foundational skills that my mom and dad gave me that I'm fortunate enough to have, because most inmates don't have that. How do I go from here to the Olympics? And for me, it was learning how to brush my teeth every single day, right? It was very small. I had to start seeing very small things that I couldn't do previously, and executing those on a daily basis is actually a true indicator of progress and success,
Yeah.
right? It couldn't be
Right.
a grandiose thing. It couldn't be the first $1 million deal that I had if you're in business.
Right.
It couldn't be the first time I was ever
Yes.
paid $20,000 to speak for 60 minutes. It had to be just getting a microphone and putting it in my hand, or
Right.
putting a toothbrush in my mouth and brushing my teeth, because that wasn't something I could perform every single day. And then
Yes.
realizing this is the part of the progress journey, or the journey to success, or the journey to growth.
Yes. And I love how you post your thing every morning of brush your teeth, make your bed, organize your stuff.
Yep.
And I have to say, that has changed my life because I feel a little embarrassed or ashamed to say this, but my bed was always made, but a lot of times it was by my assistant or something. And since I see that on your stories every day, I'm like, no, I'm going to do these little things. I mean, I've heard the Navy SEAL speech, make your bed, da, da, da. But really, until I saw your post every morning of that, and sort of the backstory of how, there was a time where it was like, you didn't even have a bed to make. It's like, we take those little things for granted. And that really has changed my morning, because now I do brush my teeth, make my bed, organize my stuff. And it is definitely kind of a game changer, a mindset changer. And I've heard you talk about, you have to do the little stuff before you can do the big stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was what I needed. I needed something that would ground me intentionally to a specific set of behaviors that could communicate to myself, I still am capable, I still am doing, and if I continue, time will catch up to my vision, my goals, and my dreams, right? But it will also put me in a position where when everything is not going the way I want it to go, I can come home and be settled that I took care of everything that I could control.
That you could,
and that
yeah.
was the most important thing to me, was because my natural state of being, outside of who I am today and the work that I've done to get here, is out of control. Right? It's constantly feeling anxious, overwhelmed, frustrated, angry, disappointed, and feeling like I'm never going to be able to get there. And so if that was my baseline previously, and I was able to grow into this place where I was okay with myself and content with everything and how it was going no matter what, then I also needed something else that could exist that was a more constant. Right? Because I can't control my emotions.
Right.
You can say things to me that are going to disrupt me emotionally.
Right.
Anybody can say sticks and stones can break your bones, but words will never hurt me. It's
true.
total bullshit.
It is. It's not true. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
such a boomer thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like, get it done. You just
Right.
bootstrap your way into it. And there's a lot of truth to that. But the hardcore truth is,
well, there's value to it.
sure,
Yes.
sure, that can be your keep going
Right.
mantra, right? But the
Yes.
reality is, words will hurt you.
Yes.
Actions will affect you.
Yes.
But when that's happening, what do you do? And what do you have to confirm that everything is going to be okay? And it sounds silly, but making my bed, brushing my teeth, and organizing my stuff is always baseline. And that's why you see, even if I'm in downtown Riverside at a
Yes,
hotel,
at a hotel.
I still take care
Still
of
do
that baseline.
Right.
Because there's a lot of things that I've had to delegate out as I've grown as a business
Yes,
person.
right,
Right?
yes.
I spoke recently on a very prominent business podcast, and the guy was very intrigued by the making the bed thing because he could see that he was farming out,
Like
even
I was.
making the bed,
like
right?
I was, yes.
And I think that for me, I don't ever want to get rid of that piece because I don't want to be too far extended away from who I really am. Right. And it's not that because time is money, right? Especially for somebody like yourself, who's everybody needs to try and fix their situation. And you've stepped up and said, I'll do that. But there still has to be a place where you remember who you are and where you're from. Right. And something that you're not too good to do.
Right.
And for me, I don't ever want to be too good to make my own bed. Because that is where I lay down. And that is where I have to try and finish a hard day or finish a day that was better than I ever expected, say my prayers and find my gratitude and get ready for the next day.
Oh, I love that. That's so good. My dad has always told me, like, never forget where you came from. So I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have kids?
No kids. No plans for kids either.
Okay.
I think I'm 40 and I'm gonna be 41 and I've never had a burning desire to have kids.
Okay.
It's just never been a thing for me.
Yeah. So, but if you did have kids or, I've heard you talk about your girlfriend's son, like the things that you were trying to instill in him.
Yeah.
What would you do? I mean, of course, there's certain things are out of our control, but like, what would you do to try and make sure that your kids did not get involved in addiction?
So I think we have to play chess with words here, right? Nobody gets involved with addiction.
Okay.
Because when we say something like that, we may think that addiction is a choice.
Okay.
Right?
Educate me.
So if you go down this and you do these things, this will happen. Well, that's not necessarily true. You could smoke cigarettes today and never smoke one again. Somebody could smoke weed for 3 months or do it once a week, once a month, bi-yearly, I don't know, whatever it is. Just because you smoke weed doesn't mean that you're going to be sleeping behind a dumpster shooting heroin. Right? There are some very important things that we need to understand. And so for me, it's, look, we can't stop kids from being kids. The whole idea of not having sex before you're married and never using drugs, that what was presented to me is a total crock of shit.
Okay.
Because 95% of people are going to have sex before they're married, and 95% of people are going to try some type of substance, whether it's marijuana, alcohol, tobacco, it doesn't matter. Any type of mind-altering substances, I would believe 95% of those people are going to try it.
Okay.
What happens to that person when they try it is uniquely different. From a neurological standpoint.
Right.
So take somebody like myself who's struggling with mental health. I'm 18 years old, struggling with suicidal ideation, anxiety, and depression is really starting to take over my life. So getting out of bed is very difficult. If there was a flat line, and we called that baseline, that's a person who doesn't feel great, doesn't feel bad, but they're actually really good with where they're at. You take me, and now I'm this dip, this ditch, and that's my brain frequency. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't like where it's at. It has a very, very negative mindset, perspective about you, about others, about myself. And then I introduce a substance that creates a temporary spark of euphoria, whether it's through wine, whether it's through nicotine, whether it's marijuana, pills, whatever it is. What ends up happening is the dopamine rush hits, and it takes me up into this swing upward, which is the other part. I feel great. Things are going good. I'm so in love with this person. I want to talk to them again. I want to go back inside that car because that car was so fast and so fun. That's the dopamine we get and the excitement we get from things we enjoy and people we love. Well, a drug can create that same type of feeling. And it's very dangerous for a person who has a very low brain frequency because what gets introduced to them is something that they've never felt before. So then when they come down and the substance wears off, the brain actually takes you into a lower brain frequency than you were before. So that's what kicks in the craving.
Right.
Go back up because that was a very good place to be.
Right.
So then the brain starts telling you to take the substance again. You take it again, but you don't go as high as you did before.
So that's where you have to keep upping the ante,
Yes.
so to speak. Okay.
Yes, because what the brain does is try to keep itself safe.
Right.
And it's basically just neurologically rebalancing itself.
Okay.
And so when it rebalances itself, it doesn't let you operate from a place too high, because that's very dangerous for the mind and for the body. And so then you try to go back up and you can't go as high. And then you come down and you go lower than you were before.
Yeah.
And so the more you play this game without recognizing what's happening, the more you put yourself in position for an addiction to occur.
Got it.
This is why some people can have a glass of wine and walk away from it.
Right.
That glass of wine and the dopamine release or the altered mood that it provides to them isn't a sense of relief or excitement to the degree it is for somebody who finds themselves in addiction. And that's why it's like, you can't choose yourself into being an addict, right?
Yeah.
Is you're just different than the other person. Because right now there's people that are watching me speak, and a lot of you are going to have a glass of wine tonight and you're going to unwind.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't do that. Even after 17 years of absolute sobriety, no nicotine, alcohol, anything that's changed my mood or mind.
Right.
No, if I take one glass of wine, my mind will feel such a shift in its mood that my brain will start telling me, you should probably do this again next week. But next week, you can have 2, and that's it. And then I'll do that, and then I'll be like, well, what if you did it on Wednesday? You could just have 1 on Wednesday, which if you're not an alcoholic, you're like, what? Who does that? Well, that's what my mind does. It starts planning drinks. It starts coming up with scenarios where I can move the chess pieces on the board in a way that I'm not going to become addicted, right? Whereas my girlfriend, who's a total normie and maybe drinks twice a month, she says, I feel like a margarita tonight.
Yeah.
She'll go get a margarita and she might not even finish it.
Right.
Or we'll go to dinner and she'll have a glass of wine and she might not even finish it.
Right.
Because what that glass of wine is offering her isn't so high in the dopamine rush, because her baseline is that she's pretty content with who she is, that it doesn't take a hold of her mind and say, you got to have this.
Yeah.
And so what do we do for kids to make sure that their behaviors don't lead them to a place of addiction? The only thing we can do is set up the parameters. What happens after we put the parameters in play is out of our control. And that is what is extremely devastating for families whose kids went to USC and had medical degrees, or pharmacists and doctors or lawyers who became alcoholics and lost their law practice because they just couldn't stop drinking, right? They become devastated because we did everything that we could and yet this still happened. So the parameters for me, especially in modern day, is number one, a safe space for conversation. Parents need to be the most vulnerable conversation a kid can have while they're aging into their early adulthood, right? That means we want them to tell us anything and everything. And through our adult experience, we share how we would manage this situation or how we have managed a very similar situation. And the key to me, and something I do with Jameson, who is my girlfriend's son that's 13, is we really try to talk about the emotions. You know, he got rejected by a girl. And, you know, he obviously, as a man, I don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, I don't care if you don't want to talk about it. Let's just talk about this, because in my past, I've had problems struggling, processing rejection. And here's just something I want you to consider, talking to yourself this way when you feel rejected, right? Because when a girl rejects you, or a person that you're interested in rejects you, or even a business deal, it doesn't mean that you're not capable. It doesn't mean that nobody will ever love you or like you. It just means that person or that moment is not meant for you. So talk to yourself kindly in an empowering way and move forward through that situation, right? These are the parameters that I think that we need to be creating for young people, is that internal dialogue. Understand your emotions, identify what they are and what they mean based on what you define them as. So when you become an adult and you start experiencing rejection and betrayal at a high level, I think we all know in this room, 18 to 25 was a wildly... very fast changing life. You know, the best friends you thought you had were the worst friends you ever could have had. And the direction you thought you were going to take your life was actually not the direction you ended up going. the skills you have from 13 to 18 are how you manage that. And if you're not careful, if we don't build our young people up with strong emotional skills to communicate and to talk to themselves in an empowering way, when they become 18 or even sooner and somebody hands them a weed pen for the first time or says, let's go buy a 12-pack and get shit-faced, and when they get drunk, that drunkenness provides them such a high level of relief, they're ready to do it again because they think they found the solution. Yeah. Because before that moment, they never had a solution. And so I think if we give them those foundational skills, even if they were to go astray,
right,
they would have some foundational tools that would kind of help them find north a lot sooner, right, or more efficiently.
Okay. So since you've decided to get clean and sober, have you ever relapsed?
No.
That is amazing. Isn't that amazing?
It is, but relapse is a part of a lot of people's recovery. For me, it's not, I had one relapse in this whole thing. I started using at 18. I was arrested for the robbery at 21. I was let out on felony probation. I had a really good attorney and some...
Shout out to good attorneys.
Yeah, shout out to a good attorney and parents that could pay for it.
Yeah, true,
yeah. So when I got out, I was court-ordered to treatment. That was in 2005. I relapsed by the end of the year.
Okay.
And so then I went on a 2.5-year run. By 23, was homeless. Was arrested, violated probation at 23, served 2 years in prison, and I have not used any mind-altering substance since May 17, 2007.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were in prison for 2 years. At what point in that 2-year journey did you declare, like, these are my goals? I'm going to open a treatment facility. I'm going to do the Olympic thing, like all these things. What point in that prison sentence did you declare that?
Probably 2 weeks in.
Really?
Yeah. So I raced BMX.
Yes.
And I was on the cover of a magazine at 18.
Okay.
So the BMX dream really wasn't a pipe dream. I was very good on a bicycle. I was going to go back to something I was very gifted at. That's how me and my friend Derek met when we were 13, 14, was racing BMX. And so I just had so much time because we were on lockdown for 23 and a half hours a day, and I'm in a cell that's, a third of the size of this room.
Yeah.
I had nothing but time to think. And really what I was trying to do was utilize this spiritual experience that I had on January 21st, 2007, which led me to my faith in Jesus Christ, was I was looking more inwardly.
Were you raised with faith
at
all?
No. Okay. I had this crazy spiritual awakening event, and somebody called and told me that God was going to give me these chances, and if I didn't stop before these 3 significant chances, I was going to get arrested and go to prison. And a year later, after he told me that, I was pulled over 3 times in 4 days. And then 2 months later, invited to church. Okay. And then told that God favored me and everything that I was done. I didn't have to worry anymore. He was going to remove me from my addiction. Wow. And then that night, I broke into a house that was up for rent. The next day was January 22nd, 2007, when I was arrested. So by the time I got to Wasco State Prison in May or February-ish, was it February, somewhere around February of 2007, I was focusing more on my relationship with God and what he wanted from me, because at that point I should have been dead. The amount of drugs that I was injecting intravenously, I was a speedball guy. So if I didn't have cocaine and heroin or meth and heroin or prescription opioids that I could mix with meth and heroin, I typically didn't do it. And I was a very dangerous IV user. Yeah. And so I'm in prison now thinking, like, why am I here? Like, what do you want from me? To date, 16 kids I went to high school with have died from drug overdoses.
Oh my gosh.
17 people that I know. And that number grows every single year. Wow. Yet I'm here.
Right.
Why?
Yeah.
What do you want from me specifically? And I just started to feel like God was telling me, I need you to go to a place and do something so great that people will listen to what you have to say, because I'm going to do some work through you. And so I started meditating on that. And it's like, what am I good at? What has God made me good at? And it was always sports. And I started meditating on that. And then I was like, BMX had just been introduced or going to be in the Olympics the following year. And so I was like, maybe this is what I'm supposed to do, is I'm supposed to get on this bike. I'm really good at it. I know I can do this. I never even tried before, and I was one of the top amateurs. Yeah. I need to get out, be pro, get to the Olympics, create the stage from prison to the Olympics.
Right.
People will listen to what I have to say, and then along the way, I have learned that God has given me an ability to understand mental health and addiction and people and behaviors, and then articulate it in a way that's easy for people to kind of understand.
Right, yeah.
And I can
see that.
I can change the culture of how we treat people like myself or inmates or people that are on the street right now in San Francisco or downtown Riverside, Corona, that are talking to themselves, that people think they were just using drugs and that happened. Well, that's not always the case. And so I'm in places that I can kind of shift that culture.
Yeah.
So the 4 goals came to me while I was in prison. The treatment center didn't show up until 2018.
Okay.
But it was like, okay, now I got to go to work because I got 2 years. And 2 years didn't feel like it was enough time. They started talking about early kicks and letting people out of prison because we had a lot of the medical issues in late 2008 to 10. A lot of people were dying from staph infections.
Yes.
They were overcrowded. I will speak to that. They were overcrowded.
Okay.
I was in a hallway that was a dormitory designed for 50 people with 120 people.
Oh, wow.
Like this, I could touch both of my bunks like this. That's how many people were in there. So you got staph infections the size of softballs. It takes 3 weeks to 5 weeks to see a nurse for that staph infection. And so people started dying in there from these very treatable things.
Right.
And then the attorney started getting involved and saying, this is not humane.
Right.
And so then they started talking about early kicks, and I had been down for almost a year, and my neighbor was a guy that was like, we're getting out. A lot of people couldn't wait for the floodgates to open, right? Yes. And that 82% recidivism rate was 93 when I went.
Right, that's what I was
So a
gonna
lot
say
of these guys
is,
couldn't wait to get back to the dope pipe,
back to what they were
doing, right?
Oh.
And I remember telling my neighbor, I was like, bro, I can't go home yet. I'm not ready.
I have more work to do.
I have more work to do.
Yeah.
When I told him that, I was still learning how to get up in the morning.
Yeah.
I used to sleep till 5, 6 o'clock at night. So getting up at even 8 o'clock in the morning and staying awake till noon, that was actually one of the hardest changes I've ever made in my life.
Really?
Was learning how to get up in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you realized, okay, I have these 4 goals, I need time in prison to work on them. Did you talk to fellow inmates about that?
Yeah.
And what was the feedback you were getting?
A lot of laughs.
Okay.
Toby Wade was the greatest mentor of my life. He was an African-American gentleman that was serving a life sentence for murder. Okay. And we weren't even supposed to communicate. And I think that he was one of the very few that felt like, okay, I think this is actually real, what this kid is talking about.
Right.
But I was also very verbal. When you talk about your goals and the things that you want to do, for people that just live life based on instinct, that is, something happens, they respond, and that is their whole life. There's never any introspect. Why did that happen? How can I change that from happening again? Or how do I draw up a plan, follow that plan, create a routine, let the results teach me whether or not that routine works, and then adjust on the fly so I can achieve in the future. Yes. Most people you throw them a ball, they catch it. There is no other form of life to them. Something happens, they respond. So when somebody comes in and they have this different way of doing things, you just laugh at them.
Yeah.
Right? They're so outside of the norm, so to speak. It's like, there's something wrong with that guy.
Right.
What is he talking about?
Yeah.
Somebody tell that guy to shut up.
Yeah.
Because I was really good at basketball, and the whites allowed me to play basketball with the blacks because I was so good at basketball. That was my original dream. Okay. These guys would invite me to come play basketball. They'd be like, Hoff, let's go play basketball when I'm walking out to the yard. And I'm like, well, I got to train for the Olympics first.
Yeah. And they're like, who is this guy?
Yeah, bro, Hoff.
Right.
You're not going to the Olympics, bro.
Right.
What are you talking about? Mm-hmm. But what they didn't understand is that I had finally learned for the first time in my life that how we treat today and how we visually put ourselves in today is what's going to happen tomorrow and 100 days from now.
Yeah.
So what people didn't understand is that I was coming into knowing how this actually worked. And so what I believed was I had to train as if I was about to go to the Olympics. Mm-hmm. So mentally, physically, and spiritually, even though I was in prison, I was at the Olympics. And I had this duty, this responsibility to give 150% effort in this environment. Otherwise, I could not manifest it in the future. Yeah. So what they're seeing is this kid that thinks he's just going to do these crazy things, and he's crazy. Mm-hmm. It's never going to happen. Yeah. What they didn't understand is I was teaching myself to live today I was teaching myself to live 10 years from now,
Right.
even though I was in today.
Yes.
I was at the Olympics and it was going to happen in my life years later, but I lived that moment as if it was years later.
Right.
And that's what allowed me to put the effort in, to make the investments, to make the sacrifices, and listen to people laugh at me.
Yeah.
Listen to people tell me I couldn't do it. Or my parole agent
Yeah.
literally try and embarrass me and my mother
Right.
to the degree that, yo, this kid's full of shit.
Yes.
And it's your fault.
Yeah.
You know, trying to make my mother feel like she was a bad mom. When my mom, if you met Mama Hoff, like you might see her on my IG every now and then, she is such a gentle human.
Yeah.
She really doesn't want to hurt anybody.
Right.
She just wants people to do great things. You know, when Twitter was new and everybody used it back before it became cat profile pictures and everybody's a political expert and
Yeah.
scientific expert on
Right.
things, she just posted quotes that were inspirational. Because my mom is just a positive, nurturing person, right?
Yeah.
And so for somebody like Agent Mason, who I'm now friends with, to really put my mom in a position where, you know, she would have to listen to something like that. Like she's not smart enough to know when her son's not doing what he says.
Right.
Right.
So have you ever had the conversation with him? I mean, because obviously he knows what you went on to do.
Yeah, he reached out to me later.
Okay.
Couldn't believe it.
Okay.
And it was right before the Olympics was going to come to fruition.
Okay.
He's on my mini documentary. I drove 7 hours to get him to say I told his mom he was full of shit. Yeah. And I was like, you know, because he said, if there's anything I can ever do for you, just let me know. And I was like, you owe me this.
Yeah.
I'm coming to film you.
Right.
I wish we would have been able to put other parts in there because it made him look a little brass, which he was in that moment,
Yeah.
but he has shifted more towards the middle. He apologized. We hugged.
Yeah.
He just said he was really scared for me and that the recidivism rate was 93%.
Right.
And here's this kid
Yes.
talking
So
about
maybe
these things.
he was coming at it from a place of love and care, maybe.
Well, he was.
Yeah.
But how he framed it was so boomer.
Right. So boomer.
And that's the work I do, right?
Yeah.
It would have been easier for him to use his words if he knew. Like the parameters I want you to teach young kids is, buddy, I've never seen an inmate ever come out with these goals.
Right.
Like I've heard goals before, but I've never heard something so lofty as this.
Right.
And that scares me. Because what are you going to do and how well equipped are you for failure if this doesn't happen?
Right.
Because what I've learned is failure is going to lead to a discomforting emotional state. And that same state is probably why you use drugs and the addiction even happened in your life in the first place. So what can I do to help support you? Because what I want for you is all of this to happen.
Right.
But the likelihood says this may not happen because nobody in 7 billion people has ever been in prison and participated in the Olympics.
Right.
Why are you going to be the first one? So what can I do to support you and your family? So if this thing doesn't work out, you don't go back because that's what I don't want.
That does sound so much better than what
Right?
he actually said.
Right. It's like,
Yes.
hey, I see
Yes.
you. I love what you're about and I love what you want to go do, but let's make sure that we have looked at reality.
Right.
And if we have, how can I make sure that if reality takes place statistically, you're not going to go back to where you were?
Right.
It's just a totally different way of communicating. And this is what I talk about. Like if you make me the CEO of a
Yes.
prison, things will
Right.
change because everybody will understand the dynamic of communication, empathy, compassion, empowerment.
Right. So do you think he, based on the experience with you and maybe learning from that, do you think he has shifted how he speaks to?
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
He was
Okay.
rough.
Yeah.
He was rough.
Yeah.
He really, I got a kick out of it because I've always liked people that are like that.
Okay.
And I was in a position at that point that he could have said anything to me and he wouldn't have ruffled who I had built myself up to be.
I wanted to ask you about that. So when you were sharing, your goals with other inmates and they were basically laughing in your face. I mean, at that point, you've been in prison for a very short amount of time. You're coming off of a drug addiction. You said before, like part of the sort of events or mental state that kind of led to the addiction was, the way you processed rejection. So how were you taking the rejection at that time? Like, were you already so strong that it did not matter what the inmates were what kind of feedback you were getting?
No, I had to have a mantra.
Okay.
That was something I never had, right? Think again about the parameters we want to give young kids.
Okay. Was that your mantra? And
was one
is
of
your
them.
mantra?
Yes, and it's
Okay.
also the mantra of PH Wellness, my rehab, right?
Okay.
They get this T-shirt when they graduate. On the back, it has our coin. They get a coin. It says, I can, I will, and I'm able. We talk about mantras, right? And that's our ability to step away from a moment that does not feel like we're going to be where we want ourselves to be. And we just repeat to ourselves, I can, I will, I'm able. I can, I will, I'm able. And it's really trying to drown out the noise.
Right.
It's making you feel like you can't, you won't, you're
Yes.
not able.
Yeah, because we all have a lot of
Yeah,
noise.
yeah, everybody.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are.
Right.
You know, and that's why I'm very intentional now about, like, when I'm in the car, I usually don't listen to music. And that's weird for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Especially for my girlfriend when we first started dating. She was like, yo, why don't we have music on?
Yeah, that might be a deal breaker for me,
Yeah.
actually, if I'm dating someone and they don't have music on. I'm like, ah.
Yeah.
But okay, tell us why.
So for me, when I'm in the car, it's a very specific time that I have where there's nothing else going on. When I'm at home, there's things to do. When I'm on a plane, there's things to do. When I'm at work, there's things to do. When I'm here, so I can't really get in tune with God, my emotions,
Right.
my reality, my moment, my future, and that gives me a time to really reflect inwardly about things, repeat my mantra if I'm discomforting or discomforted, to really kind of empower myself through certain types of moments, but also listen to myself and ask myself, do I need something right now? Am I overlooking a personal need for myself right now by distracting myself with these other things, with music, with food, with women, with all types of things, right? Life has a vice for everybody.
True.
And if we distract ourselves to the point that we deny ourselves our own needs, then our behaviors will shift to an area of impulse. And impulse for me is one of the most dangerous places to be
Okay.
because I have the addicted brain.
Right.
So as soon as impulse provides relief, my brain says, yo, let's do this again. With everything.
Right.
So I've had to learn to ask myself, do I need to have a conversation with somebody? Do I need to get on the phone with Derek and talk about some of the stuff that's going on in my life and release that emotional stress that I'm holding on to? Because if I don't, I will find other ways to try and heal that stuff that's happening. And so that time without music just really gives me, internal reflection to think about my day, think about my future, think about yesterday, and try and make sure that I'm in a place of harmony, and that's baseline.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you know if you have an addictive brain?
Well, you'll know because you can't skip days,
Yeah.
right? And then
So I would know I'm 42. I would know by now if I have an addictive brain.
Sure,
Because I would be addicted to stuff.
Yeah, well, or let's just say you have to have a bottle of wine at night.
Okay.
That's probably a problem.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
We currently have had somebody that was in treatment at my place that drank 5 bottles of wine a night.
Okay. Wow.
What's the difference between 1 bottle and 5? Nothing to me. Because if you have to have one, it's no different than 5. The other person just may be experiencing misery or discomfort to the degree that 5 bottles is what it takes to get rid of it.
Right. Okay.
Is how much of something that is mind altering do we need to feel okay? Food is another thing. Right. Are you constantly eating food outside of times that you would normally eat? Are you just eating to feel comfortable? Right. How do we replace that with something that's comfortable? So I believe you would know because I use alcohol because as adults are listening, alcohol is the most consumed mind-altering substance in the world. It's legal after 21 in the United States. It's socially acceptable. But if you have to drink Monday through Sunday, or if you have to have a bottle of wine every day, there's probably a problem there. Yeah. Even if it was a glass of wine, I would say, you know what, take some time where you didn't have that glass of wine, not because you're addicted and it's controlling your behaviors, but so you can feel the emotional swing when you don't have that wine, and then ask yourself that swing that you feel, what is this? Right. Why is it here? Is it trying to tell me that I'm working too much? Is it trying to tell me that I'm not having conversations with my significant other that I need to be having? Is it distracting me away from something that needs a solution and needs to be fixed? Because if that's the case, it's actually stopping you from getting yourself to a position in life where you really love who you are and everything that it's about. The other thing is there's binge people.
Okay.
right? So you might have somebody that says, well, I don't need to drink every day. But at some point, you might drink every day for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and you might be excessive, and then things might start sliding downhill and you stop. Those are still alcoholics.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, those bingers are still alcoholics, and sometimes their impulse behaviors are more wild than anybody else's because what they do in that 2 to 4 week span is like wild.
Right.
Those are
Yeah.
sometimes
They're on a real bender.
They're on a real
Yeah.
bender. Yeah.
Okay.
They spend a lot of money, and so
Yeah.
if you're not like that, well, then you don't have an addictive personality. Right? You can
Yeah.
do something, walk away from it, and your mind isn't consumed by when do I get to do that again?
Right. So ironically, the episode after yours is about pornography addiction, which like that was not planned at all. It's just the way the calendar went.
Yep.
Do you believe that all addiction does sort of stem from the same place,
It's
same
exactly
issues?
the same thing.
Whether it's heroin, shopping, food,
Yeah.
it's all the same.
Sure, it's a dopamine
In
hit.
the mind.
It's a dopamine hit. The dopamine hit becomes a neurological normalization process in which the dopamine hit does not return to the original high. The normalization process means that you have to do more to increase the feeling.
Right.
And the pornography one, as you're going to learn soon, is very, very dangerous, right? Because what happens with pornography, specifically with young people, is they see these scenarios and these environments that are sexual in nature
Right.
that are not normal 95% of the time.
Right. It's not real.
It's not real.
Right.
So then there's the dopamine hit, and then there's the visualization of what this sexual experience is supposed to be. Then they go into the world and they start engaging intimately with their significant other who does not do what they saw,
Right.
who's not willing to go there.
Right.
And immediately your brain says, well, this sucks.
What a disappointment.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I like this person because I don't want to be alone, but I'm also going to engage in this behavior
Right.
that really spikes my sexual dopamine hit and makes me feel pleasure. Then the problem is, well, how long is a guy on girl porn going to give you a dopamine hit that feels like pleasure
That's the big
before
problem.
you're engaging
Yeah.
in much wildly
Yes.
different pornographies
Yes.
to create the dopamine hit, which is pleasure and arousement. Now the partner that you're having sex with, you can't even function sexually because the person is not giving you any type of stimulation that your brain thinks it needs to have to be aroused.
Yes.
And so you're going to learn about all. It's very
Yes.
fascinating, but to me, it's
Yes.
the same. And
It's the same.
Gambling.
Gambling.
Put
Yeah.
money down, you get money back. Bing.
Right.
Reward.
Yes.
Put more money down. Lose money, you come back down.
Yes.
How do you get back up? Put more money on the table
Right.
and win and walk away with something to hold on to.
Right.
And you get engaged in that same behavior.
Right. Okay, so let's shift to your treatment center. You own a treatment center. You co-own a treatment center in Riverside, California.
Yeah, not far from here.
Yeah. Do you guys treat all types of addiction?
Yeah, but we don't do pornography. We don't do food. So eating disorders, pornography, we try to tell people we could, but we're not the proper location for that because they have facilities that specifically treat those individuals. And you really want to be around individuals that are struggling with the very similar things. So drugs and alcohol are what we focus on, although we are dual diagnosis.
What does that mean?
Dual diagnosis is just that we can treat mental health,
Okay.
which what we've learned is mental health is directly connected to substance use and addiction. So we think about that brain frequency.
Right.
That's mental health.
Okay.
Almost everybody comes in with some type of mental health struggle, not to the degree that they need to be medicated for the entirety of their treatment course or after they leave treatment, but some need to be medicated because they've never been medicated.
Okay.
And some need to be stabilized with medication while they're going through withdrawals or alcohol trimmers, and so they don't seize out. And then we wean them off these medications, and then we focus on holistic care. So therapy, group therapy, outings. We have a big fitness component, right? We want to try and reintroduce dopamine the way it's supposed to be, is getting
Real
out,
dopamine,
punching
not the
not the
cheap
cheap dopamine, right? The one that you can recreate every single day, and when you come down, you don't crash.
Right.
Because that's the key, is creating healthy dopamine through connections, through relationships that are healthy, through physical activities, so that when you're done partaking in whatever area that is, there's not a crash that makes you crave something that's self-destructive. And so we treat holistically, and we treat medically, and we treat the whole person.
Okay. So speaking of the whole person, from looking at your content, following you, I mean, you really touch on so many different areas of life: relationships, parenting, business, obviously addiction, all those types of things. And you seem like you've done a lot of personal development and obviously grown a lot as a person yourself. Is that all part of recovery, or like where does that come from?
It's recovery.
Okay.
Anybody that's actually working a program of recovery is on a similar trajectory.
Okay.
My gift is that I can articulate it.
Okay.
You can I could introduce you to a lot of people in recovery that know what I know. They just can't tell it to you the way that I do.
Okay.
And so their solutions and their pathway and how they put it out there are much more simplified, and that, oh, okay, but how?
Yeah.
Right? And so what we try to do in recovery is remove every external facet of life. So what's happening is not because of the external world, it's because of our internal world. Right? It's forgiving others, letting go of resentments, focusing on serenity through prayer and meditation, and giving back to others. Is we try to live life selflessly, and we try to live life internally, that everything is about us. It's about our thinking. It's about our actions. How do our actions not only affect us, but also affect others? And so it's this spiritual process that cleanses us out and makes us more unique, more whole, more peaceful, more serene individuals that, sometimes when you're in a place, people can tell. Like there's something different about her. There's something different about him. Well, me at 17 years, that's a long time. And I'm not a person that's just 17 years sober. I'm 17 years into recovery.
Right.
And that's a journey. You learn a lot about yourself in 17 years.
Yes. And admittedly, like I said, I don't have a lot of experience with addiction and people in addiction or recovery. But it sounds like recovery is personal development.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if everybody did a 12-step program,
we'd all be better off.
I don't think you'd have a job.
I'll find a different job, Tony. It's
I
okay.
know. Well,
But
here,
yes.
with this, you wouldn't have this job.
No, I know.
Promise you.
I know. There'd be less divorce. There'd be less, yes, the world would be a better place.
Because the center of recovery is selflessness.
Right.
It's the removal of self.
Yeah.
The way I think, the way I believe, the way I behave, the way I react. It's all about me and my selfishness and removing that, right? So partners would have conflict resolution and conversations and not run from each other. We would be less manipulative. We wouldn't be lying, cheating, and stealing. We would be about lifting our partners up and growing together and creating true intimacy and strength, which what it takes to have a marriage to go 47 years like my parents. But we don't have that. We have a very self-centered society now more than ever. Social media and TV has created consumerism and consumption to degrees that we've never seen before. The world hates Western society more than ever because of our consumerism, our arrogance, consumption, and this idea that things are the answer to everybody's problems, right? Yeah. Well, when it comes to human connection, that is probably the easiest way to disrupt our ability to see each other as uniquely different. Right now, we hate each other more than we hate each other. We communicate less. Divorce rates are up. It just seems like the family, especially in the United States, the family model is completely being blown out, and we're losing our foundations with that. Recovery would absolutely change that for everybody, but not everybody's going to believe they need it.
Right. Yeah. Amazing. Well, I think that let's end on that high note.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. This has been fantastic.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad we got it to align. The stars align. Yes. Thank you.
I've got just a little bit more to say. Whether you struggle with an addiction or have an addictive brain or not, the key to showing up as the best version of yourself is really all about growth. But the big question is, do you have the willingness to do the internal work, to do the sometimes painful work and to live selflessly and do the personal development that is needed to show up as the best version of yourself. Like Tony says, if we all did a 12-step program, the world would be a better place. And don't ever forget, you were made for more.